Good morning and welcome to this lovely Tuesday, our final session in the series on conscious living. I want to thank you for joining me on this journey. It's been 8 sessions and we've covered quite a bit. So what we're going to do today, we're going to sort of knit the different sessions together, as well as touching on wholeness as a perspective or as a way of thinking about your life rather than perfection, and integrating or becoming an integrated whole. So without further ado, I also want to welcome everyone that's new, that is just starting to watch the series. Remind everyone that the videos, all the videos have been archived on my Facebook page, and you can find them there in order. So I recommend strongly that you go and have a watch through them or look through them. And again, if you're watching them, please like, comment, share if you want. I'm happy for that. If you're watching this particular video or presentation, please say hi so that I know you're there. I thoroughly enjoy doing these sessions, but like I said, I have no idea who's watching. I can see quite a few people are viewing the videos, but I have no idea who. So it's great if you say, how's it? And I'll always try as hard as I can to respond to you. All right, so let's step into today's session on integration. So the objective of today, like I said, is to integrate all this prior learning that we've done, to join the dots, sort of knit the sessions together so it makes a cohesive whole. But integration also means about becoming whole. And so we're going to talk in today's session a little bit about, and I'm going to introduce you to a model that speaks to wholeness and how do we get to this place of wholeness. And how do we start leading conscious lives rather than unconscious lives. And as we've discussed already, I read a little bit about mindfulness. Mindfulness helps you to make the unconscious conscious. So we're trying to bring these unconscious drivers into our conscious world. Hi Ray, thanks for joining us there from New Zealand. So we're going to talk about perfection versus wholeness. And I just want to touch on this word perfection briefly. And I often ask people, what does perfection mean? And people have all these different ideas around what perfection means. But essentially, perfection means without flaws, without errors, without mistakes. Then I challenge whoever I'm chatting to about this regarding this word called perfection. And if perfection is missing flaws or lacks flaws, can it then be perfect? So my idea of perfection means it has to include flaws. It needs to include imperfection. Otherwise, it cannot be perfect. So we have to learn to shift from perfection to wholeness. And wholeness is perfection and imperfection combined. So we've spoken a bit about what this means, but in Carl Jung, who I love to follow, he was arguably the first transpersonal psychologist. He spoke about our shadow. Our shadow is our unconscious selves. It's not our evil self. It's not an evil twin. It's nothing bad that lurks there, but it's everything that we're scared of, everything we run away from. It's this repressed part of ourselves. So the argument would be that if you are striving for perfection in your conscious life, your unconscious world, there's a program or a script there that says, I'm imperfect, or I'm not good enough, or I'm a failure. And so we constantly strive at a conscious level to be perfect. So we have to integrate the shadow. That's not going to stop you striving for perfection, but you're going to do it less unconsciously, and you will now do it consciously. So it's very important to integrate the shadow, and I'm going to show you a model in the next slide about what this means. Carl Jung has argued or said that in the dark there's gold. It's fertile soil in which we can plant, grow, and flourish if we just go and look in the dark. But most of us are too scared to look there. And we've chatted about, I don't know if it was in this series or a previous series, where we spoke about the monster under our beds as kids and how we're too scared. You know, some of us will go and look. We shine the torch under our bed or in our cupboards to go look for the monster, and we see there's no monster there. And when it comes to ourselves, our personal selves, we put a very thick layer, and you'll see in this next picture, over that unconscious self. We don't want to go there. We don't want to accept our insecurities and etc., and our fears, because we think if we do, it's going to make us more scared, but it doesn't. The minute we see it, we learn to integrate it, and we no longer need to run away from it. So go and scratch around in the dark corners of our psyche is important to do, we shouldn't lock these parts of ourselves away, because when we do, we start living half our lives instead of living a much fuller life, a much more lived experience. So I'm going to talk a bit about this model called the psychosynthesis model. You're welcome to go and Google it and go and check it out. There's quite a bit of it on the internet. But it's a lovely model, and psychosynthesis says exactly that. It's about synthesize or bringing together all the parts of ourselves into a cohesive whole. And when we do psychosynthesis, I'm not going to do a whole talk now on psychosynthesis, but you would first do ego synthesis and then you would do spiritual synthesis, which becomes a bit more deeper and starts delving into the transpersonal psychology side. But what we're dealing with now currently is all around the ego, so it's about bringing the ego parts together and trying to integrate all of these into a cohesive whole. So let me talk a bit about this psychosynthesis model. I don't know if you can see my cursor on the screen. I'm not sure if it's coming up like that for you. I think it is. But so this model is a model by a guy called Asaglio, and it's quite a modern psychologist. He spoke about psychosynthesis. So this whole egg-shaped thing represents us, and then he splits us into a lower unconscious, a middle unconscious, and a higher unconscious. The middle is what we all know about ourselves. So we know we're a bit scared. We know we're a bit insecure. What we don't know is what we've hidden right underneath the bottom here. This is our lower unconsciousness. And we think we're putting a thick layer across this bottom level here, but we don't. This level is permeable. So all this lower unconscious fear, all the stuff from our past, filters through into our daily living over here and affects us at this level. And the argument around this is that, and I'm just briefly touching on this model, we have to get rid of this barrier here because we're only living a third of our lives here. And those that want to experience love and peace and calm and tranquility, who say, I keep looking for this, can never find it because they're so constantly trying to keep, we've done the story around polar bears, we're trying to keep the polar bears out, or the sadness, or our insecurities. So our focus is all down here on our fear and our past stuff. So we have to open this barrier here so that we can start living less in fear. Only then will we be able to experience the higher unconscious stuff of love and peace and joy and calm. So I'm not going to go too much more into detail about it, but this is about what wholeness is. Wholeness would be trying to live our whole life and not just this middle third. Okay. And I will talk about this maybe in another series and we'll go into it more depth. But that's just a brief introduction. In the center of this is I, and it's what I know about myself. But we don't know about the lower unconscious. Only with coaching or with therapy or counseling can we start uncovering some of those things about our pasts. So moving on, today we're going to, like we said, we're going to focus a little bit on that, but more on how we knit these 7 sessions together. So we're going to discuss the key processes, how they link together, we're going to integrate them, and also focus on ways of integrating mindfulness into your daily living. So the past 7 sessions are merely a starting point on an endless journey. We never arrive, as I mentioned right in the beginning, when you first start on a mindful journey and about becoming conscious, you will never arrive at a point where you say, oh, I'm now this conscious being. Or I've now arrived. I remember working with a young guy who said he's given himself 2 years to become mindful. Now that's defeating the aim. You're never going to become mindful ever. You can only ever be mindful. So it's not a thing that you arrive at or a destination that you arrive at. It's merely a change of life. It's like changing your eating habits, changing your, starting to exercise. Being mindful is about being conscious sort of as many times a day as you can. And you will never make 100%. So if we can be conscious 70% or 80% of the time, that's great. Good morning, Dawn. Thanks for joining us. So when we're doing any of this conscious living or mindful living, we have to constantly practice. So sustained, continuous practice is essential. I'm going to be putting together a webinar later on, maybe mid-June, end of June, somewhere around there, on the full mindfulness course, which involves a lot of practice. We've taught you basically around the body scan. We've spoken about the body scan and the different formal exercises like the sitting meditation, etc. But continued practice of those meditative states is extremely important, as well as the informal practices, like when you're brushing your teeth, to brush your teeth and being mindful of it, or drinking coffee, etc. So mindfulness should definitely not be used as a substitute for getting into the present moment, even though mindfulness will get you into the present moment. But if you start using mindfulness as a form of self-medication, again, we're defeating the aim, because then you're dissociating and running away from stuff again, instead of disidentifying, which we've been trying to achieve with mindful thinking. It's very important to see mindfulness as a way of life. Like I said, rather than arriving at some sort of destination, it is a way of living, and it's changing your whole way of living. So the ultimate aim then with mindfulness training or conscious living is to cultivate this mindfulness of open awareness, which we've explained before is non-judgment, as well as observing, being able to observe something without going, like I said, oh, this wind is terrible, oh, it's too hot today, or it's so hot, So we're always moaning and griping about stuff, and that's straight away we're doing that, we're putting judgments onto our experience, and then we're having a very limited experience rather than a full experience. another extremely important thing, I spoke to a lady today on the phone about cognitive behavior therapy, which involves changing someone's thinking. With mindfulness, we're really changing our relationships to our thinking and relationships to our emotions and our bodily sensations, rather than trying to change the thinking. So, if you're having a panic disorder or panic attack or anxiety, we want to take tablets to run away from it and not feel it. And it's way better to just change the relationship to sort of, in a weird paradoxical kind of a way, make friends with that anxiety or make friends with your panic. I had a lady as well who came to me, and I said to her, well, I'm going to let you go back down to Cape Town with your anxiety. And she was quite freaked out by it, because she said, but I've come here for you to take it away. And I said, I'm not going to take it away, but you're going to go back to Cape Town and it's not going to bother you. And after 10 sessions, she went back to Cape Town and her anxiety didn't bother her at all anymore. And she still had anxiety, but it didn't bother her because we had changed the relationship. So in this presentation, we're going to integrate the topics, like I've said. We're going to look at how do we integrate this mindfulness into our daily life. So the topics. So we've covered quite a few topics across these 8 sessions. We're just going to do a refresher course across this. So the first session was on intention and the now. And attention being the most important building block, because without attention, we can't store anything in our memory. So we have to attend, then it has to be stored into our brains, and then we have to be able to go and retrieve that information, for example, if you're learning. Without that, you're not going to be able to do it. So, and if you're not focused on the present, and if you're in the past or the future, you're not even going to be able to attend. So it's extremely important as a starting block of a mindfulness course. The second session was on automatic thinking, automaticity, which is a great way of thinking about them is ants in our heads, and ants are automatic negative thought systems. And once we start noticing the ants, so the minute we turn, we spoke about putting bouncers in the previous session, bouncers in our mental stories. And once we put bouncers there or a doorman and we start monitoring our negative thinking, that negative thinking straight away decreases. But when you're not there to watch out, all hell breaks loose and there's a party going on in your brain. I call it a teenage party with no parents there. So you can imagine the anarchy that's going on inside your head without monitoring it. So automatic thinking is kind of being on autopilot with no control there, and your thoughts are running rampant in your head. And we also confuse with our thoughts and then start acting out on those thoughts without even realizing that I've let go of the steering wheel and my brain is controlling me rather than me controlling my brain. Then judgment was a really important session or a chapter or a part of this talk. And judgment is about, or the removal of judgment. Now, we also said that we cannot stop judging. We are judgmental beings. We judge all the time. And when I say all the time, literally all the time. We are weighing up things right, wrong, good, bad, hot, cold. I like it, I don't like it. It makes me feel good, it doesn't make me feel good. The minute we're putting a judgment on it, we start shaping reality, creating our reality, making a lot of, it causes duality, where we split this into good or bad, and it creates a lot of conflict because we start saying, I don't want to feel this way, I should be feeling that way. And so judgment is an extremely important part of conscious living to become aware of. And what we suggested in that session was just to be able to see your judgment and then to be able to put it aside. And I like the term or phrase suspending disbelief. So if you're listening to someone that you disagree with, or someone's posting something on Facebook that you believe is fake news, it might not be fake news. It might very well be, but if you judge it, you're not even going to entertain that information. So you won't be able to grow as a person. So it's better just to put your judgment aside. You can still walk away with that judgment afterwards, but if you put it aside, you can actually see the reality for what it is, what it presents to you. Then acceptance was a really tough session. It always is a tough session because we spend our lives running away from something. And acceptance is about, and I repeat it even when I posted some posts on my Facebook page, some memes and some quotes, people were struggling with this word acceptance, and maybe they didn't attend this whole course or this talk on acceptance, and they would think it applies to a situation, and it doesn't apply necessarily to a situation. It applies to your feelings and your thoughts about that situation, and starting to accept those, because it's your thoughts and your feelings that we don't want to accept that stop us making changes in our life or making us too scared to step out of our comfort zone. So acceptance and allowing those feelings to be in your body is extremely important. It's almost like I said right now in that early start on psychosynthesis. Once we can accept our fears, accept our insecurities, accept that we have a part in our head that says I'm stupid, or a part that says I'm a failure, accepting those statements doesn't mean that you're going to become stupid. It means that you're going to stop running away from them and stop being scared of them, because they're making you act out in a different level, a different way at a conscious level. Then session 5 dealt with goals, and we didn't speak about goal setting, which I always find is quite a boring topic, even though it it has its role and its place. But we spoke about how important it was when we are setting goals, when we are trying to be goal driven, we need to stop focusing on the future, because if we focus on the future, we very seldom can get to our goals, because we need to know where we're going for the future, but achieve what we need to do in the present. All right? Because otherwise, if we constantly are only living in the future, we'll keep procrastinating and never get there. So it's what am I going to do now in order to get to my future goals? So it's still very present centered. Then compassion. Compassion dealt a lot with not being only compassionate for others, which is extremely important, and as part of being on this planet is seeing others important. And we spoke a little bit about love thy neighbor as thyself, and do unto others as you'd want them to do unto you. And we said that those statements are not just love thy neighbor. It says love thy neighbor as thyself, and it doesn't just say do unto others and then stop there. It says do unto others as you would have them do to you. But most of us tend to forget about ourselves, and we think it's all about the other person. And this compassion dealt a lot with self-compassion. And in mindfulness, everything starts with the self, because without being whole and integrated yourself, you're constantly going to be blaming other people. So any of my sessions, any of my coaching, any of my therapy, I always deal with self-awareness in our first few sessions, and taking responsibility for your life. People often come to me and blame their partners or blame whatever, and I say, well, the partners are not here, or these other people in your life are not in the session. So I've got to work with you, and as you change yourself, so these other people will change too. Then the ego was a great session on how we identify with different parts of our roles that we take. I think I'm going to do a one-off session on ego and change, but the ego goes and takes and buys into titles, it buys into the car, it buys into a house, it buys into your social status, and then it doesn't want to let go of those things, because it feels if we let go of those roles, it's going to die. Falsely thinks that, but and the ego is full of all these false fears. But we need the ego, so the ego is quite important that we learn to disidentify from these roles and thoughts and feelings, and not over-identify with these. So yeah, that was about the ego. And then today's session, which we're going to touch on, which is about integrating all these different parts of this last series. So mindfulness has got these several components, and we've touched on all of them. Each of these components we presented separately across the course, and in real life there are many links, and we're going to just touch briefly on some of these links. So attention on the now spoke about awareness, and if we're unaware of these things, if we don't even realize this habitual way of thinking, we're not going to have any change in our lives. And the attention and the here and now was about becoming aware of these automatic patterns, our judgments, our conflicts, our goals, the compassion and identification. So the attention and now touched into all the other 6 sessions: automaticity, judgment, acceptance, goals, compassion, the ego. So attention and now links up with every single other part of this discussion. Then we spoke about automatism, which this automatic thoughts or automaticity prevents any change, because we're just on autopilot. We don't even realize we're doing it. So all the topics also link into automaticity. So automaticity too touches in with every single one of the sessions we've covered over this past week. Then judgment. This is our first step in our conflict and our struggle. Judgment stands in our way. I think there's also a phrase where it says, let the scales of judgment fall from your eyes so that you can see more clearly. The minute we do that, we can start seeing a lot more clearly, and it's definitely a product of the ego. And often when we judge others, it's because we have low self-esteem or we're insecure, because judging others or gossiping about others, for example, inflates my ego. So I end up because I've got a deflated ego or an underinflated ego, being judgmental or holding anger about someone and not forgiving someone, etc., always puts me in a one step up position. So it makes me feel better than myself. So it's definitely a product of the ego, and it's definitely a hallmark of the inner critic. And because of being a hallmark of the inner critic, it ties in with compassion. So the judgment tied it in with acceptance, compassion, and the ego. Then acceptance. This was, as I said, this hardest subject for all of us, because I think it's how the profession started, was people coming to psychologists to say, take away my pain. But non-acceptance, when we don't accept what we are going through right now, we end up losing touch with the present. And we want things to be like they used to be in the past, or we're scared that it's always going to be this way into the future. So it's definitely we lose touch with the present. And it's also very goal-oriented. When we don't want to accept how we're feeling now, it's because we think we're going to be happier in the future. So I'd rather be in the future than here. And this also means it touches in with the goal-oriented or the future nature of that session on goals. And then when we accept ourselves when we're suffering, it does tie in with compassion, because it's what we're trying to do. I think I mentioned one of my clients that came to see me that said, so is it okay to cry after his wife of 50 years passed away suddenly? And then non-acceptance also certainly reflects ego functioning, because perhaps I'm not allowed to cry. I'm a macho male, so therefore I shouldn't cry, I shouldn't have feelings, that's too weak. So it's definitely ties in with ego functioning. So your acceptance ties in with attention in the now, the goals, compassion, and the ego. Then when it comes to goals, we said too much focus on goals means less attention for the present moment, and then we'll never end up reaching our goals. So this means we have difficulty accepting this, because we don't want to accept things in the present, because we say this is not contributing to my goals. I had a session with a lady yesterday, and she kept saying to me, but when are we going to work on stress and how to handle my stress? And I said, but everything in the current session that we've spoken about plays into building up your coping resources in order to deal with stress. But she didn't see it, because she's so focused on getting to this place where she's going to be happy, she can't realize that it's happening right now. I remember doing a slide show to a group of engineers, and I think we were on slide 59. It was after tea already. I'd been there for the whole morning with them, and it was about 11 o'clock, and someone put up their hand and said to me, Greg, this talk is great. I understand that you're going somewhere with this, but where are you heading? And when is the slide going to come that says you've arrived? And fortunately, there was someone that understood totally what I was doing in the session, so I didn't even have to answer this chap's question, because this guy said, but let's call him John, but you're missing the point. Every single slide has got learning on that Greg is showing you. But this guy was looking for the one slide at the end. So he was so caught up in the end or the future. And this often happens with scientific minds or critical minds, or the top engineering kind of mind. They want an answer, and they don't understand that there's a whole lot of steps to get to that answer, and each of those steps are learning. So we can lose out on the present learning. And then goals are definitely set by the ego. When I drive my flashy car, when I live in my nice house, or if I'm in the right neighborhood. So goals tie into those: attention in the now, acceptance, compassion, and the ego. And then compassion, extremely important, and it requires attention for your own suffering in this moment. We spoke also about sympathy versus empathy, to trying to teach yourself, and it's certainly something they teach us in psychology, to have empathy rather than sympathy. And the difference was, sympathy means that you suffer with that person and you feel their pain, can't sleep at night, want to solve their problem, and it sort of puts the person in a victim position and makes you also, again, puts you into a one-up position. Whereas empathy means you understand that the person's got pain and you're going to help them to get out of that pain. But you don't need to solve the problem for them. You don't need to rescue them. They're not a victim. And also, you can only start doing that once you've become whole yourself. So this journey towards wholeness is extremely important, and we can only get on that journey towards wholeness once we stop being other-centric. We've got to start becoming a bit selfish to become selfless. So this argument around self-compassion, spending time seeing a psychologist, working on, one of the things they said to us in Masters training to be a psychologist is they highly recommended us going into therapy and I spent 1.5 years. I would never have gone, perhaps had I not gone on this journey. I thought psychology was for people with mental illness. And it's not that. It's anyone who wants to grow and become better can see a psychologist. And there is a place for psychiatrists and clinical psychologists, etc. But you have to give yourself that time, or that 1 hour. Sometimes people don't even want to give themselves an hour to go and spend with a coach or a psychologist. They're just too busy. And they feel guilty if they spend their time on themselves. But it's good time to invest in yourself. Right, so compassion ties into the attention in the now and the ego. And then the ego, great session on the ego. We were trying to move the ego into a more dynamic version of itself, but the ego is a very fixed story, because the ego grabs onto its position. So it's either I'm a married person, or I'm a CEO, and then suddenly, right like now, I'm a restaurant owner, and all these restaurant businesses have gone through a diabolical time now through this lockdown. And now suddenly you're not a restaurant owner. Or I've had to deal with doctors or lawyers that have now come for retirement, and suddenly do I still tell people I'm a doctor because I'm not a doctor anymore in private practice, or I'm not the CEO or the MD of my legal firm. So now I'm just Greg, and am I okay being without my title? So we've got to understand that the ego should rather become like an evolving self, so it can be more adaptive to changes as it happens. And the ego is obviously sustained by this automatic thinking and the behavioral patterns, because my thoughts just keep popping up. I have to have more money, for example, and it's of course the source of many, many judgments. And normally that's because we're struggling to get to that point of having a healthy ego. Once we become whole, we start moving closer to having a healthy ego. But without wholeness, we're either going to have an underinflated ego or a deflated ego, which means we're going to constantly have to attack, criticize, be judgmental towards others, or we're going to have to overinflate our ego to make ourselves feel better. And normally those two go together, because we constantly move from deflated ego to inflated ego, deflated ego to inflated ego. And then, of course, the ego is heavily focused on the goal of becoming. One day I'm going to become happy, and it spends its whole life waiting for that day when it's going to be happy, because it doesn't really think it's happy right now. And it's constantly judging and comparing itself to others. And the ego aims to maintain a self story rather than accepting the self. Just want to repeat that line. It aims to maintain the story about itself rather than accepting itself. So the story says, I'm a rich guy living in a nice neighborhood, driving a flashy car, was abused when I was a young kid by my teachers and the bullies at school. But that's a mental story. Whereas the self is something much deeper than that. The self is able to stand back from the story. Sometimes they even talk about it in terms of an overhead projector, or a data projector. So the image on the screen is normally blank, and then you put a slide across it, which is your thoughts, etc., around the feeling. But I'm actually the data projector. That's the self, not the pictures on the screen, because that keeps changing. So the ego ties in as well to ego ties into all those sections: attention, automaticity, judgment, acceptance, goals, and compassion. So how do we integrate this mindfulness into our daily living? We start talking about conscious living as this training being a start. Again, with anything, you could, and I haven't even said this at the beginning of the series, but if you just took 10 people and put it into a triangle and had break those 10 into 4, 3, 2, and 1. 4 people that have watched this training will be exactly the same as they started. They will not have benefited. They would have watched the series, but they won't have benefited. Certainly you can't unlearn what you've learned, so it's in your psyche, but they won't change. 3 of you will, I call wake up, will awaken. 2 of you will decide to do something about it, and only 1 of you will ascend. Take this to the next level and see where you can go with this. So it's extremely important to decide which level of that triangle or that pyramid are you in. The 4 that don't have benefited, have watched this, read lots of books on conscious living and lots of self-help books, but don't do anything about it. Are you going to be the 3 that go, wait, there's something here, I get it. And that's okay, because there's already, that spark's been blown on, the flames are starting to burn. Or you're going to get out of bed, now the flames are burning a lot brighter, or are you going to ascend, which means you move beyond this and actually take a big leap and change your life. So it's extremely important. So the more you practice, the more you start living this consciously day by day, the stronger the effects are going to be. It's going to be like a cumulative effect. It's the same with any sort of hypnosis program. The more you do it, the stronger the effects are. And we've talked about a lot of things in this, and you've got to decide which ones are you going to keep practicing, which ones would you like to think more about and focus on in your life. So in closing, it's extremely important to change your habits, and they do take time. I've presented 8. This has been a very theoretical series, but there's a practical component to this course, so I will be doing it later, and it's actually an 8-week course, and it needs to be done over time with homework every week. And it does take time. So it takes sometimes 3 to 4 weeks to break your habits. And we've got to move away from this doing mode to a being mode, of being able to just sit still and check in with your thinking. But it does become easier over time. It's really hard in the beginning. And that's why it has to be an 8-week course. The mindfulness-based stress reduction course, which this one is sort of based on, not what I've presented here. I've just presented the theory behind it. We haven't done any of the practice. It does become easier time, but we need to carry on at it, because eventually you're going to say, I can get it. There was a time when I could not sit still. I'd always be moving or scratching my face or doing something. I still talk a lot with my hands, but I wasn't able to sit still. And now I can sit still for ages without having to scratch my face, because I don't automatically have to listen to what my thoughts are saying. And just a reminder, it's not about becoming mindful, but about being mindful. And it's important to practice. All right. So thanks for joining me on the series. I'm still not sure where I'm going to go with the next series that I want to run. I'm thinking of doing one on anger, because I think we're all getting quite angry right now. Some guy pulled into the parking bay for people in wheelchairs, and I gave him a dirty look, and as he got out of the car he says, what's your problem? You got a problem with me? So I think people straight away are done with the lockdown. They're really under a lot of pressure. So I think I'm going to probably chat a bit about anxiety and how this increases our stress response, and which would make us more volatile and more prone to anger. So I think we'll chat a bit about anger and anxiety in the next series. But thank you for joining me, and all the best. Have a wonderful day.